To go from Native people basically only existing as cannon fodder for John Wayne to murder in old westerns to a Native action hero, empowered and not a stereotype and nuanced in not just the specific Comanche experience of that era, but also of, what it means to be a Native person of that era. And oftentimes when I watch films with Native characters, there's a lot of stuff that I personally have to choose to ignore if I want to enjoy the thing. Prey doesn't have any of that. It's just cool and good.
Hello, and welcome to Care So Much. We're so excited to have you here. I have an amazing guest today. His name is Joey Clift, and he is a comedian and TV writer. He's an enrolled Cowlitz Indian tribal member, and he has a bunch of amazing work. I've got a lot of things to say because he names everything very cool, so I'm going to read the actual names of the things that he made. So he has a short called How to Cope with Your Team Changing Its Native American Mascot, as well as my favorite title of anything, which is telling people you're Native American when you're not is like telling people you're a bear when you're not a bear. Very worth watching. Those links are going to be in the description of this episode. Most recently, he has been a writer on Netflix's new Spirit Rangers TV show that is coming out later this fall. But we are actually here today to talk about the movie Prey. We've got a lot to get into, obviously. Joey, before I just talk about how cool you are for an hour, would you like to introduce yourself and talk about why we're talking about the movie Prey?
Yeah, hey Lillian, hey everybody, thanks for having me. And also apologies for how long the name of that short film is. It's 24 words long. When I named it, I didn't think that people were going to have to say it a lot, but here we are. So we're here to talk about the hit movie Prey, which came out a few weeks ago on Hulu. It is, I believe, the fifth entry in the Predator franchise, seventh counting the Alien vs. Predator series. And it's an amazing movie for a million reasons. A lot of people consider it to be the best movie since the original Predator, which starred Arnold Schwarzenegger and came out in the 80s, or maybe just the best Predator movie, period. And so I like it as a movie, but I also like it because it's really historic as far as Native representation goes. This is the first major motion picture starring a Native woman, the first major motion picture, in the history of cinema to have a largely Native or an all-Native main cast. It has Native people working all over the production. Jane Myers, who is an amazing producer and a member of the Comanche Nation, worked behind the scenes. And I saw a lot of quotes saying that she touched every frame of the film to make sure that the Comanche representation in the film, because the tribe that the film is based around is the Comanche tribe, is like accurate and cool and great. And it's just a movie that, I can't stop talking and glowing about. It's just such a good experience for about a trillion different reasons.
I don't watch scary movies. I'm very easily scared. I'm genuinely some, like, I don't watch Hocus Pocus. Like, that's the level of it's too spooky for me. So obviously I was thrilled to have you on, but it did mean that I had to have a friend over during the day to watch this movie with me. And I have not watched any of the other Predator movies. So I do think that it was an incredible film to watch. It was just an amazing movie all in and of itself. But I think people could probably watch it without watching any of the other things.
First off, I want to say that, look, I get it. Bette Midler flying around on a vacuum cleaner is terrifying.
And I watched it when I was too little, so like it's the trauma of watching that when I was a little kid. They eat children in that. That's the whole thing those witches are trying to do.
Oh yeah, and like the weird zombie guy, like he's really like I get it. There's a lot of creepy stuff going on. I mean,
Thank
honestly,
you.
I think that I've talked to a few friends about this with Prey. I mean, it's like a sci-fi action horror movie, but I feel like the horror elements. It's not like that scary. It's
Mhm.
more of an action movie with like a couple of jump scares here and there. It's a prequel in the Predator franchise. Most of the Predator films take place, either modern day based on when the films came out, or the near future. Prey takes place in, I believe, 1719 in the Comanche Nation, which is like the Plains Central, United States area, North America. What I love about it is that it's a movie that just tells a really complete story and a really satisfying story, regardless of whether it's a Predator movie or not. The movie follows the character Nadu, who's played by Amber Midthunder, who's an amazing actress, in her rite of passage to basically becoming like a Comanche warrior in the Comanche Nation. And the rite of passage that she chooses is to hunt the freaking predator. Who have you not? If you've not seen a predator movie, it's a giant alien that hunts people for sport. Like,
Mhm.
it has such a great arc of like so many people in Nadu's tribe discounting her and not believing that she the abilities to really hunt anything. Like there's a point early in
Mhm.
the movie when she like tries and fails to hunt a mountain lion. Her brother comes to the rescue and kills the mountain lion for her. But she's a character that's shown as being like resourceful and intelligent and empowered in a way that like the other characters don't really see. And as the movie
Mhm.
goes on, they like slowly begin to understand that as she's slowly stepping into her own power until the end of the movie she's going toe to toe with, like I said, the freaking predator. And
Mhm.
there are definitely references to the previous predator movies, but I'd say that they're more subtle Easter eggs as opposed to something that you like really need to watch to get the movie. Like the flintlock pistol that Nadu gets from the French trappers that she shows to her tribe at the end of the movie
Mhm.
is the same flintlock pistol that the Predator aliens give to Danny Glover's character at the end of Predator 2 as sort of a, like a war trophy or something like that for Danny Glover defeating a predator. Spoilers for a movie that came out in 1990. There are a few little moments, but like what I love about it is like I feel like all of those Easter eggs are designed to subvert the previous Predator movies in a way that like you don't need to see it to really appreciate the movies, but if you get it, it just like says so much about kind of the franchise as a whole and how Dan Trachtenberg, the director of the film, viewed the films. The first shot that you see of Arnold Schwarzenegger, who starred in the first Predator movie in Predator 1, is he's climbing out of a helicopter smoking a cigar. The first thing that you see kind of tipping you off that there are French trappers that are on Comanche land is the burnt out cigar next to a buffalo carcass, and the French trappers are constantly smoking cigars. The first Predator movie is about basically like an invading force invading a country to, like save fellow soldiers or something like that. And Prey is about people that are indigenous to the area defending the area from an
Mhm.
invading force, the French trappers, as well as, like I said, the Predator. Like these are all just like little cool thematic things. You're not necessarily going to watch the movie and be like, wait, why is everybody in the theater applauding? I don't understand what's happening. But it's something that like it's clear that it understands that it's a bookend to the Predator franchise in like subtle ways
Mhm.
that are just like cool, and I love it.
Beautifully, I think for fans of the franchise, there's even more that you get out of that, which I think is very, very cool. Um, I happen to know that you're on a tour right now of podcasts because you tweeted out you would go on any podcast to talk about this. And that's the kind of enthusiasm that this podcast is for. So, just having a little bit of a meta moment about this, what about this movie went from it's a good movie, it's a good Predator movie, it's something fun to watch and enjoy, to I will go anywhere to talk about this movie?
Like I'm not necessarily like jumping on Twitter and saying that I'll go on a tour to talk about, any movie. Like
Hmm.
it's very specifically this movie. And, like I mentioned, it's really great just, as a movie. Like it's such a great entry into the Predator franchise and it's such a great really just like theatrical experience. But beyond that, like I said earlier, this is the first major motion picture in the history of the United States to star a native woman, but like I would say, like as far as like major franchises go, probably star a native person. The like we're running into a history of mistreatment of native people in the media as well as just in society as a whole for hundreds and hundreds of years. So to go from native people basically only existing as cannon fodder for John Wayne to murder in old
Hmm.
westerns to a native, basically like our Arnold Schwarzenegger, like a native action hero who's like empowered and not a stereotype and nuanced in not just the specific Comanche experience of that era, but also like of what it means to be a native person of that era. And I feel like oftentimes when I watch films with native characters, especially if there aren't really a ton of native people working behind the scenes, there's a lot of stuff that I personally have to choose to ignore if I want to enjoy the thing. If it's racist or a stereotype or clearly ignorant or problematic because no native people worked on it, or like if all of the native people are wearing like clearly native Halloween costumes, these are all things that whenever I like watching a film and something like that happens, I basically have to make a choice in the moment of, am I going to ignore this so I can enjoy the movie, or am I going to let this ruin my viewing experience of the movie?
Hmm.
Prey doesn't have any of that. It's just cool and good. Cool and good. And like, like I mentioned, Jane Myers was a high level producer on the film and also a member of the Comanche Nation. And it's so clear everybody involved in this, natives and non-natives, were passionate about doing right by Comanche people in the creation of this film. Like I've talked to members of the Comanche Nation that worked on the film who've said they would show cuts of this film, like early edits, to like elders in the Comanche tribe and high level people at the Comanche Nation, and they would change the movie based on their feedback. They went so far in making sure that the representation is accurate that all of the outfits that the members of the Comanche Nation in the film are wearing have like clothing dyes that are accurate to what the Comanche Nation would have had access to at the time. There's a moment in the film when Nadu, Amber Midthunder's character, is going back to her tribe, and you see like a baby on a cradle board being carried. And Jane Myers, the producer of the film, made that cradle board herself because she wanted it to be so accurate. With native culture and native language, there's a Comanche dub of this film available on Hulu where all of the native character dialogue was redubbed in Comanche, and the original cast of the film were so passionate about making sure that that was right, and they were so excited about it that everybody came back to like re-record their roles entirely in Comanche. Like native languages, they're traditionally passed down orally. They're not usually written down up until fairly recently. Jane Myers had to go to, literally like her grandparents and people in her tribe to ask for the translations for these words in Comanche, pronunciations of these words in Comanche from like literally her family members to make sure that it was accurate and respectful to the Comanche language. So just the amount of care that went into that. Like I said, Jane Myers
Hmm.
has said in interviews that there's not a frame of this film that she did not touch.
Hmm.
You can really feel it. So like on top of it being, a great movie, it's also just to me what the bar is for what I expect for all, not just like films, but TV shows and forms of media in the future about native people, of the amount of work that they have to do for me to like think it is valuable or worth watching at all. There's also, like I mentioned, like native people traditionally haven't really had a lot of positive representation in the media over the years because
Hmm.
of, the whole genocide thing. That has like a lot of like negative effects. Like there are a lot of research studies connecting that to things like low self-esteem in native kids, which if you only see yourself as like a racist caricature sports mascot and that's the only representation for you that you see in the media,
Hmm.
you're it's going to make you feel like not only is there not a future for people like you, but there's not a present for people like you. And like that there are a lot of studies showing that direct correlation to low high school graduation and college enrollment of native kids, which is some of the lowest in the nation, and also just like high suicide rates among native people, which is some of the highest in the nation. It sounds like dumb because it's just an action movie and I get it, but like for a native kid to be able to see a major motion picture that is like respectful of native culture, starring a native woman, that a native kid can watch this and think, you know what, maybe I'm cool enough to be able to kill the predator, is just
Yeah.
like, it's like indescribable how not just cool, but how valuable that is. And, so
Hmm.
like I said, this movie's cool for a million different reasons. There was a meme that was going around native Twitter that was, for those that don't know, so an Indian taco, it's fry bread, which is sort of a like a, I wouldn't say like a traditional native food, but it's kind of like a modern native food that's basically like, it's kind of like fried dough. That's and then an Indian taco is basically like a taco put using fry bread instead of like a tortilla or something like that. And it's something that you can buy at a lot of like powwows and events. And there was a meme floating around that was like an Indian taco stand where it said like Indian taco stand, Comanche predator meat Indian tacos, $20. And it's like, oh, that like I could maybe go to a powwow and like it's like that's a funny joke, but it's also like the pride that I would feel Like, I'm
Mhm.
not even Comanche, I'm Cowlitz. That Comanche is, kind of Oklahoma is sort of where it is. I'm Cowlitz, which is like Southern Washington State. But like that I could maybe go to a powwow and like buy an Indian taco from somebody who's clearly like grifting, F predator Indian tacos. It's just the amount of pride I would feel eating something like that. It's just
Yeah.
great. That's one of the reasons that I'm so excited to like go on different podcasts and things to talk about this is like I feel like for a lot of people, especially if you're not native, you could watch this and just see it as a cool action movie and then recommend it to your friends. But there's a million other things going on that I think it's very important that natives and non natives are aware of with this film.
You answered so many of the questions that I like often talk to people about the idea of like, why does that representation matter? I had an early episode of the podcast was about the MCU, and we talked a lot about representation, and particularly with this most recent phase of the MCU, and how difficult it is to do exactly what you described that you don't have to do with Prey, which is balance that I don't want to be too critical of a thing because if we're too critical of a thing because of representation, they're not going to do any more representation because they're not going to try to put characters in that represent this group because they got yelled at about it last time. So, and I think that you laid out sort of those examples of what specifically the work that goes into creating something that is instead that really positive example of representation. So, to to the people who may look at all of that work that needs to be done and go, well, not every movie is going to have a producer that has access to members of a native tribe. Not everybody is going to have like how would you sort of address that idea of if you want to do representation well, here's the work that has to go into it and how people should be approaching that. Obviously, big movie studios, there's a different conversation. There's a conversation for big movie studios, and there's a different conversation for like the everyday creative. But how would you have that two different conversations?
So, wait, can I swear on this podcast? Okay,
Absolutely, yeah.
so for major studios, fuck you, quit being lazy. Like, uh, yeah, I mean, like, but like, I said that kind of as a joke, but it's like one of the reasons that we've seen such little native representation in the media up until really just the past 2 years or
Hmm.
so is that Hollywood executives would make an easy excuse of, yeah, we want to do this, but does anybody know any native writers?
Hmm.
Like, or like, oh, we want to do this, but like, oh, I've never heard of a native actor before. For me, I'm a native person working in Hollywood. There's a ton of super talented native folks who are doing a lot of great work. I think that oftentimes Hollywood executives, major studios, will only look at the farm leagues and breeding grounds for talent that they're aware of, and those
Hmm.
spaces aren't necessarily, I would say, friendly to native people. So if you're only pulling your writing talent from Harvard, how many native people are going to Harvard right now? And I think that you're seeing a lot of really great work on TV. Rutherford Falls on Peacock was the first ever TV show in the history of US television created by a native person, starring native characters. It came out on Peacock last year. Reservation Dogs, another TV show created by a really great native person, Sterling Harjo, in partnership with Taika Waititi. It has an all native writers' room that came out just a couple months after Rutherford Falls. So they're kind of the two firsts for live action TV
Hmm.
shows created by native people in the 100-year history of television. Reservation Dogs very easily cobbled together an all native writers' room. Rutherford Falls very easily cobbled together like half of the writers' room is native. That's just because they're native people creating the show who have access to these communities
Hmm.
and know great talent and know who to work with. The TV show that I'm working on, Spirit Rangers, is the first kids show in the history of US animation created by a native person. The Shumash TV writer Krista Valencia with an all native writers room, native characters played by native actors, and native people working kind of all over the production to make sure that the representation is accurate. And that's because they hired native people in high levels early on to like help put this
Hmm.
together. I mean, something that like I ran into, and one of the reasons I'm a staff writer on it, but also a consulting producer on it, is that I'm really well connected in native Hollywood. So if we wanted a native composer, Netflix might not know anybody, but I've got 20 names in my back pocket I can add. Voice actors, like me and like other people working on the show who are native are just well connected to native Hollywood, and we know who to cast in different roles. Whereas a casting director who's never cast a native project before might not have access to those things. So, like once again, to reiterate my point, the talent's out there. If you're a major studio with millions of dollars to spend on TV shows and movies, and you aren't able to
Hmm.
find a Jane Myers or just like a high level native producer, then like, "Ah, fuck you, stop being lazy, do the work." Like, because all these other shows are able to do it. So like if you're not able to do that, that's like a really poor reflection of like not just you as a producer and executive, but also you as a human if you don't have native people in your life like
Hmm.
that. It's just like
Yeah.
sort of have that conversation with yourself in the mirror as to why you don't know native people. And
Yeah.
like on the lower level, the low budget level, I think it's tough, right? Like I think that from my perspective, a lot of people reach out to me who are non-native who want to tell native stories or something like that. And the easy thing for me to do is to say don't, like maybe save those stories for native people to tell. If you want to tell a native story, I mean, I think regardless, it's important to have native people working on the production because, like, if you're making a short film or an indie feature or something like Spirit Rangers, the show that I'm writing on, because
Hmm.
we have an all native writers room and a lot of native people working on the cast and crew. We're not a monolith. The native experience is a very broad experience. There's 574 federally recognized tribes, hundreds more at the state level, all with different cultures and languages and stuff. None of us can speak for the native experience as a whole. So if there's like something that we want to say or a comment we want to make or a story that we want to tell, it's very fortunate that we can jump on a Zoom of like, a bunch of native people to like hash out kind of like how we feel. I don't want to say collectively about it, but like we're able to like have the nuanced conversation of what the important things to say or what the cool things to say. And it's just like because we're all working together, we can like collectively kind of figure out what sits right with us, as a writer's room. And if you're just like one non-native without any native people working on your short film, trying to make a short film about native people, hot take, don't think you're going to have the ability to have that nuanced conversation that a room full of native people is going to have. The like something that often happens with like Hollywood productions and stuff like that. Up until recently, they would basically get really far down the line of the production. They would write the thing, they would cast the thing, they would hire everybody, and then like a week before shooting, they would realize, oh, this is about native people, and not a single native person has read this. And then they'll like ask around and be like, does anybody know a native person who could read this and tell if it's racist or not? And then inevitably, one of my friends will get a random email from somebody that's like, "Hey, we're shooting this tomorrow. Will you tell if it sucks?" And then the native person will say, "Yes, it's very racist." And then the person will be like, "Anyway, cool, good to know. Bye. We're gonna film it anyway. Bye." Like, that's why like with Prey, like Jane Myers was hired really early on to like help Dan
Hmm.
Trachtenberg, who's the director, writer, co-writer of it, who's not native, help him navigate that stuff. So it's like if you want to make something of quality, like bring in native people, bring in like a native person, specifically a native consultant or a native producer early on to have those conversations and not after you
Hmm.
shot the thing and can't change anything, even if it's low budget. Like, and also don't like, if you're reaching out to somebody, like pay them, like even if
Hmm.
it's just like a couple $100 or whatever. It's like, for me and a lot of my friends, like a few times a month will get emails from just like, or Twitter DMs or whatever from random people that are just like, I'm writing a native story. Will you read it and tell me if it's bad? And it's like, no, I'm busy. But if they said, hey, I'm like writing a native story, will you read it and tell me if it's bad? Also, I'll give you $300 for it or whatever. Like then for me
Hmm.
it's like, oh, you're like taking the time and like the emotional work of me reading this probably racist thing seriously, and you understand that that's like a real ask and not just like fun for me because I'm a working writer, I'm busy. It's like I can't necessarily stop and spend an afternoon to like note somebody's feature that's probably going to be problematic.
Yeah, because that's asking you to do not only your job for free, but also a bunch of extra emotional labor for someone who didn't check the internet first and is trying to tell a story on your behalf and doing it bad and wants you to
Yeah,
fix it for them.
yeah, it's just like we have a long history of non-natives telling native stories for us and not with us.
Yeah.
Regardless of what the budget level of the thing that you're making is, understand that if you're doing it like that, that you're part of the problem.
Yep. Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think one of the things that you said so many amazing things in there, which is fantastic. I love it. I basically don't feel like I should talk on this podcast. I should just listen to you for an hour,
Oh
which is
no,
the
it's
dream.
okay. It's okay. I can rant about native stuff all
That's
day.
the best. That's the point of the
Yeah.
podcast, is to bring people on who can
Yeah.
rant about a thing all day. But you mentioned in there that is sort of the through line that I'm seeing through all of the stuff that you mentioned, is the idea that in order to get something like Prey, that is this really great example of representation, that's not something that happened overnight. And that's not something that happened because one person got promoted into a position of power. There was a lot of groundwork. So essentially, like every single layer of any we're specifically talking about the media right now, but I think this is probably true in every single industry across wherever, that's why things like hiring a diverse staff in your interns matters, and all of those different layers so
Yeah.
that those people have access to that.
Like that's a lot of like what like the kind of what I'm saying to people kind of within Hollywood is like I don't know, maybe hire native executives. Like
Mhm.
there's only like a small handful of native executives, which executives are as a writer, I'm on the selling end of Hollywood. I'm pitching show ideas to sell, I'm developing things. Executives on the studio side are the buyers. They're the people that I'm pitching to and the people that are buying my stuff. And there are only a small handful of native sort of development executives of the thousands of development executives in Hollywood. It's really tough to expect one native person to come in for a week and completely change the thing a week before you're shooting it. If you want something to be done the right way, you've got to hire somebody like specifically for native stories, like a native producer or a native person who's in a high level decision making position in production, director, writer, producer, something like that, and like empower them to be able to make changes.
Mhm.
So, and like it's a really cool like trickle down effect. Like Jane Myers with Prey, hiring her early on, not just allowed her to give notes on the script and stuff like that. It also allowed her to identify the people that they needed to
Mhm.
be on the team to like get things right. So they hired native writers to do like punch ups on the script. They hired native costumers. They hired native people kind of in all levels. Like because Jane knew what they needed, she was able to hire people in all different areas of production that are native and have expertise in those areas. Even going so far as like hiring a native casting person who knew who to reach out to get this amazing all native cast that they have. Dakota Beavers, who's Nadu's brother in the film, he never acted before Prey, and he
Oh
was
my
so
god.
good.
He was
He
so
worked at, I think,
good.
yeah, I think that he says that. I think like his quote is he worked at like J. Crew or something like that right before being on Prey.
It's amazing.
And like it trickles down even more that because they were native people, because Jane Myers was hired early on as a producer, she was able to hire native creatives to work in other departments to make sure that things were spot on in those areas. And then because they were native people that were like department heads, they were able to hire like native people as interns to be able
Mhm.
to like get their first experience in the entertainment industry working on this film. And like that's something that I've noticed with even Spirit Rangers, the show that I'm working on, of
Mhm.
like the Carissa Valencia created the show, so she was, like as the creator showrunner, the first person on the show. And then she hired me pretty early on as like a writer, consulting producer. Because there were native people very early on in the production, we were able to like have the conversation of like, oh, we want like a native composer who's a good person to bring in for that. And because we're native people who are connected in native Hollywood, we're able to like be like new people,
Yeah.
you know. It's just like not you're not just hiring us for our abilities, you're also hiring us for access to our networks.
Mhm. That's such a great point, because I do think I know from even just in market, like I work in marketing business stuff, you hire people for their, like you hire within your network. Like the way that I work with people is I meet people, and you have to actively, if you don't have that diversity built into your network to begin with, you have to actively seek that out. But if you have like one person that you can get that in with, you can then have this whole network of people there as well. And I think
people complain about like the Harvard Boys Club or whatever. That's just that's just people who went to Harvard hiring their friends they went to Harvard with.
Hmm.
And that's because like that's what their network is, that's who they have access to. Like we all have our own networks. It's just even if if you are like for me, like as a native person working in Hollywood, I don't have a Harvard Boys Club, but I do have like Native Hollywood,
Hmm.
and if you don't have somebody who's a part of that network working on your show, if I was like doing a show about Harvard, I would probably hire somebody early on in that show that went to Harvard, like,
Hmm. Hmm.
because presumably they would know about Harvard more than me, somebody who did not go to Harvard.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then they would probably hire other people who went to Harvard. And then in that situation, the old Harvard Boys Club would be like hugely valuable if that's what the show is about.
Yeah. One of the things that you mentioned a couple of times and then you made a few jokes is you used a lot of humor in talking about some of this representation stuff. And I know I do that when talking about feminism and women's rights things. Like, I literally have had so many conversations where I'm like, I can't talk about feminism without humor because the other option is screaming all day. So, can you talk a
Yeah.
little bit about why you approach some of these topics starting with that joke, because you can see that in the two shorts that I referenced at the beginning, but and some of the ways you talked about this here.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that just like my brain is wired for comedy. I'm just a big old goof. That's probably the short version of it. To me, it's like it's a weird intersecting point of like two things that just are kind of what I am as a person. Like I just grew up as kind of a comedy weirdo who cracked jokes all the time in school, and that's just like the lens of absurdity that I see the world through. Meanwhile, I also just am native, grew up on
Mm-hmm.
a reservation. I've been really passionate about my culture for pretty much my whole life. When I moved to Los Angeles from Washington, I got really involved in Native Hollywood, and like generally aware of a lot of the stuff that's going on in Indian country and a lot of the weird racist stuff and microaggressions that non-natives make toward natives. So like of course I'm gonna bring my my weird worldview into that. And then when you put those things together, it becomes jokes about native stuff, That's sort of like why I do that. But I also understand that there is a huge amount of value to using jokes as a means to like break down complex topics.
Mm-hmm.
So my short film that you mentioned, telling people you're Native American when you're not Native, is a lot like telling a bear you're a bear when you're not a bear. I always say that name very fast just to get through it. That's about basically like it's about a lot of different microaggressions that Native people go through, specifically focused on like kind of what are called pretendians, which are people that kind of like say that they're Native when they're not Native.
Mm-hmm.
The original kind of like nugget of inspiration for that was like a few years ago, a bunch of my friends were posting on Facebook about a protest against the Washington, D.C. NFL team. And somebody commented on that because it was a public post
Mm-hmm.
saying like, hey, I just got a DNA test that says I'm like 28% Cherokee or whatever, and I think the team name is fine, so everybody lay off. And it's like I wanted to respond to that guy and maybe explain to him why like that's probably not the best take to
Mm-hmm.
have. Like if you got a DNA test, that does not immediately make you an expert on all things native trauma. Like,
Uh-huh.
but I kind of figured like, oh, that guy's probably not going to read like a think piece about the stuff that we've talked about. But if I made like a 2-minute animated short that's like really easy to share, then somebody like that might watch that if it's like cracked full of jokes and stuff like that. And something that's really cool about that is like I originally made that just to kind of sort of like something that I could use in situations like that to just have a not have to have the conversation in a way that
Mm-hmm.
this person would maybe listen to it. That short's since gone viral a ton on social media. It's got like millions of views on TikTok. Something that's so cool to see about it is that like now I'm seeing native people and like native kids commenting on the videos when they get posted, specifically that video saying like, oh yeah, whenever my like kid gets made fun of for being native at school now, he tells the person that they'd better stop or they're going to get mauled by a bear. And it's like, oh, that's like cool that I like equipped a native kid with like a joke that helps them diffuse like an uncomfortable situation for them.
Yeah. I love that idea. I love the idea of kids being like, careful, bears are coming for you. You got to be really careful
Yeah.
about what you say here.
I've got a couple more animated shorts coming out by the time this comes out, they won't be out yet, but they'll be out in the next couple months. And
Mm-hmm.
one of them is called every time you say something is your spirit animal, you have to give every Native American person you know $25.
Oh my god. That would get really expensive for some people, but feels
Oh,
right.
yeah, yeah. Look, at this point, I just want that money. Just like, you gotta, I'm just trying to, just like, look, I want me and my friends to get $25 every time we see that on Facebook or Twitter or whatever.
Yeah, every time somebody makes you do emotional labor or puts something out there like that, they owe you money. That feels right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. If you call a meeting a powwow, you have to take me out to brunch. That's just what the deal is.
That's so good. Oh, there's so many of those things. By the way, if you're listening to this and a couple of these are like you're like, "Oh, that's a problem?" Yeah, look into it. Careful what you're saying. It's bad. It's a bad time.
Yeah, look into it. Look, I might be coming for you to like open up that checkbook, and I would just be like, "Hey, yo, I gotta tax you for this stuff."
Start by just Venmoing Joey, and then eventually it'll get to other people because Joey's making cool stuff, and so eventually that'll trickle down to everyone.
Yeah, Venmo me just like $1,000, and I'll just sprinkle it around Indian country.
He'll start making art just based off of the white people guilt of the microaggressions they've been doing for years and years and years.
Truly, that is my sweet spot.
All right. And if you don't know any native people to Venmo, do genuinely, it's not that hard to make some native friends. If you
I mean, if you don't know any native people to Venmo, what's your problem? Oh yeah, I mean that's what I was talking about earlier about like if a Hollywood exec is like, "What native people could I hire for this?" It's just like, "Yo, you're in your 60s. It's like weird that you don't know native people."
yeah.
Like if you're a kid like and you're only surrounded by the people that you grew up with. Yeah, sure, I get it. But like yeah, if you're a grown ass adult, then like maybe like look in the mirror and try to think about why that is.
Yeah, it's the I think it was Jon Stewart recently did a little interview thing where he talked about how they were trying to make the Daily Show more diverse and they were looking and they were like we didn't think about it as a thing. We would just hire our interns to be like the best interns would get hired to be
Yeah.
writers and then they all happen to be white men and at one point we went, "Why is that true?" And it's because the people who could afford to take unpaid internships
Yep.
were rich white men.
Yep, 100%.
He started paying interns and it fixed
Yeah, like
everything.
100%. Yeah, it's like that sort of thing. Because like I don't. For the most part, I think that those kinds of hiring practices aren't like malicious, or at least like I hope they're
Mhm.
not. But that's a situation of like I'm sure there were probably producers of The Daily Show for years that were like, we're just hiring our best interns, and like our best interns just happen to be white dudes. So I guess that like I guess that the system works or whatever. And then somebody is like it's sort of like the like it's not our fault, we're doing our best, and then it's like are you really
And we're talking about this in the case of entertainment because of the way that that influences culture and society. But this is true everywhere. Like, I've had conversations with places at work where they're like, I don't know, like, just this one city that we're in is really white. And that's why everyone who works here is white. And I'm like, we're 20 minutes outside of a major metropolitan area and known as Minneapolis. Minneapolis is pretty diverse. People are willing to drive 20 minutes for a good job. Why aren't any of those people applying for this job? Like, that's the question you should be asking.
like Los Angeles is the either the largest or the second largest collection of urban native people in the country slash probably
Mm,
world. It in New York kind of constantly swap places. So if you live in LA and you don't know any native people, you're in the city with the most native people. So maybe think about why that is. Maybe think about why you all of a sudden don't know any native people.
yeah. And there's a little bit of judgment in that, but also like just genuinely think about that question. Don't steer away from that question. Look at that right in the
Yeah.
eyes.
When it's also like, where are you, with something like that, it's like, where are you posting your job
Mhm.
applications? Like if you're only posting them in like college alumni groups, what's the demographic of those college alumni
Mhm.
groups? It's something I often say with like the Los Angeles comedy theaters, which I kind of came up through and I'm really involved in, is it's just like you can say like, oh, we just put the funniest people on our, improv teams and our funniest people are all white dudes. It's like, yeah, like where are you searching for
Mhm.
talent? Also who's on the board of people that are choosing who's on those teams,
Yeah.
like that kind of stuff it's like worth it, it's systemic. It's like it's something that you have to like look at more than just like we did our best.
Yeah. It's very, very similar to some of the other things we were referencing that does come back. We're coming back to Prey, guys. We're 2 questions away from it. But it loops back to the topic, which is the idea that not only we've talked about kind of that production side of it and the people who are creating the thing, but you also have to have that representation in the people who are reviewing that content and who are given a voice to speak about it. So that's one of the things we talked about a lot on the episode I did with Octavia on the MCU. So if anybody is like, I'm looking for more representation conversation, go listen to that episode in terms of like this content that's being created and how that's being reviewed and perceived after it's made.
Yeah, I mean that's what I mentioned earlier with getting back to it with Prey, the
Ah,
movie we're talking about. Yay! I was trying to think of a really like ham-fisted segue, which is just like, you see, the predator is a lot like racism, and the solution for racism is a native woman named Nadu, played by Amber.
mhm,
But I didn't need to do that. There was a natural segue. So like I mentioned earlier with Prey, there were members of the Comanche Nation, elders in the Comanche Nation, who reviewed this
mhm,
film after that they made it and gave notes on it as to, like making sure the Comanche representation was accurate. And the studio listened to those notes. So it's not just as simple as like making the thing. It's also just like having, this is what I mentioned, like why it's important to have, native execs
mhm.
who are giving notes on native projects. Cause like they're going to know how to note something in a more nuanced way than just like, I don't know what fry bread is, get that out of here, like, or
Mhm.
whatever, just because they don't like know about that world. It's you kind of want like, if a show or movie is about a particular group of people, or a particular like marginalized group, you're going to want members of that marginalized group, like on all levels, being able to have input on the thing.
Mhm.
Because if you just like are not educated about that group, then you might, I don't know, accidentally be racist.
Mhm.
you know or you might just like step into stuff that you weren't expecting to step into, because you just don't know any better.
Yeah, which is an excuse that I'm no longer accepting. You not knowing any better is no
Yeah,
longer an
same.
acceptable excuse for why you did a racism.
Yeah, same.
Um, but so now that we're back on Prey, I want to talk about all the things that make this movie special as a movie because I think we really talked about it as representation. Obviously, we're gonna reference things within that as well, but it's also an incredible film. Like first of all, one of the things that I really loved about it, and spoiler for the movie, on probably one of the critical plot points, I googled it right away. The dog lives. The dog lives the whole movie and is
Yeah.
definitely one of the main heroes. Probably like third or fourth.
I would agree with that. Yeah, the dog is probably like third billing as far as like cool heroes goes. Yeah, the dog's so fun and cute. Although something I think is really funny about that is like, so the dog it's an accurate breed to the types of dogs that the Comanche Nation would have had access to,
Mhm.
at that point. But like it wasn't a film dog. They like adopted it and
I
trained it
know.
for this movie. And apparently it was quote unquote a big mess on set. Like it would just like, I don't know, like I think that a big note that Dan Trachtenberg got from executives on the film was like, we want to see more of that dog. And his like counter to that was like, we're using literally every usable frame of footage of that dog. Every other frame that we got is of the dog like biting something it's not supposed to be biting or whatever.
That's
But
amazing.
yeah, that dog's a real treat. It's adorable. It's also, yeah, the dog lives at the end. It's real cool and good and a big hero.
I also think one of the things that I found very cool watching the movie, and like I said earlier, I've never watched the Predator movies before, so maybe this is just a thing in the franchise. But I thought it was really interesting how quickly in the movie they established that, like, you're not gonna win against the Predator with brute force. Like, there's no brute force that's gonna beat the Predator. You have to outthink it. And that's like what she does at the end of this. And you watch the French colonizers who are coming in, the poachers or whatever, like really fail to outthink it.
Oh yeah, there's a multiple just like delightful action beats where the predator is just massacring French colonizers, which which by the way, I was invited to this movie's it did not get a theatrical run. It's only on Hulu. But I was invited to the premiere in Hollywood, so I was able to see it in theaters
Nice.
with just a room of other Native people in Hollywood. And when the French trapper colonizers fail to kill the predator and get massacred, what a crowd pleaser in a room full of native people. Because it's just like, yeah, take that, colonizers. But yeah, there's like a lot of really funny beats where like the French colonizers try to like unload their muskets on the predator, and like it doesn't work. It just bounces off the predator's shield, and they pause and reload because they have muskets. It takes a while, so the
So
predator just
funny.
decapitates them. It's why it's so cool. It's why Nadu, the Ember Midthunder character, is so like uniquely prepared to kill this predator, you
Hmm.
know? And something that's so cool about the film, just narratively is like um you everything that she uses to kill the predator at the end of the movie you see set up earlier in the movie. So, like one of the first shots of the movie is her throwing a hatchet into a tree and then like walking to grab it. And then a little bit later in the movie, she realizes that that sucks. So she like braids a rope out of tree bark and then ties it to the hatchet. And all of a sudden, she has like a hatchet on a rope. She can use like nunchucks with a hatchet on the
Yes.
end. There's a moment where one of her brother's friends gets attacked by a mountain lion and is bleeding, so she gives it, I forget what the exact flower is, but like a flower with like orange petals. And she tells him like, oh, like it's okay. This will cool your blood and allow you and keep you from bleeding out. And then later in the movie, she realizes, oh, the predator sees heat. So if I take this, I'm invisible to the predator.
Hmm.
And it's just, you just see her like figure out, like kind of like without knowing it, figuring out all the ways that she's going to just massacre this predator at the end of the movie. And it's just such a satisfying watch.
Absolutely, and it doesn't feel forced at any point. Like, there's a moment when she gets stuck in, like, some sort of swampy thing where it's very
Yeah.
muddy, and she's like and she uses this log to get out of there, like, guy to pull herself out of there, and then later you see that same log, and I fully freaked out and was like, "Oh my god, she's gonna sink him in the mud," because she can see the log, and, like, that's the whole last, like, 30 minutes of the movie is just you being like, "She's a genius," but it doesn't feel forced at any point during that. It's all just these little seeds that sprinkled in really naturally.
It's not only that it doesn't feel forced, this is something that I talked to with a lot of my like just like native Hollywood friends after seeing the
Mhm.
movie at the premiere. Is every native character in that movie played everything at the top of their intelligence.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, native characters in movies are just, I don't know, it's like they're just like, oh, it's a thing that I don't understand. I better worship it as a god or whatever. Whereas this is, it's like you're kind of played as like primitive is used as a synonym oftentimes for unintelligent.
Mhm.
Whereas these are characters that like, might not necessarily have the access to the technology that we have access to nowadays, but they still like are very smart. Like, they're logicking everything out. Like they're fully realized humans and not like, not like cave people or whatever.
Mhm. Mhm.
um, and that's just like cool to see. It's cool to see like all these characters being very capable and just like logically figuring out like what this predator does, even though they might not necessarily understand the exact mechanics of how their technology works in terms of the technology of it. They still understand, oh, those like three dots that come out of its helmet are what its like wrist cannon harpoon launcher uses to track. So if I like knock its helmet off and take its helmet off and it fires a wrist harpoon, it's going to track, it's not going to shoot at me, it's going to shoot at wherever those red dots are,
Mhm.
And it's just like it's a cool satisfying watch for, like I said, a million different reasons.
Absolutely. Very, very worth watching. If you are like me and things are you don't generally like spooky things, I watched it during the day with a friend so she could watch the parts that were too spooky for me, but there weren't a lot of them. There was some violence, and I think it did a good job of, like, you felt very in it the whole time. It wasn't too spooky for me, which it matters to maybe nobody, but it's very,
Yeah.
very worth watching.
Oh yeah, I mean that's like I've had the same conversations with like other friends who like don't do well with scary stuff, and it's like this is it's more of like an action movie with like light horror elements as opposed to like a straight scary movie.
Mhm. Yeah. If you don't like blood, this might not be the movie for you.
I mean, it's fair. There is a scene where the predator guts a bear, and then like that's the first time you see the predators when the predator holds the bear over its head, and the bear's blood drips onto the predator, revealing what it looks like.
Yeah, I was like, "Okay, so that's very gross. That's really yucky." But
It's gross, but also like what a cool reveal for what the predator
super
looks like.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I was like, "I get it. Yuck." It's
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
well done. You yucked me out so much.
Kind of a little Easter egg that I think is really cool about the film that I didn't realize until I was talked to a member of the Comanche Nation that worked on the film about it. One of the first times that you see the predator in the film, like the predator has like basically like optic camouflage, so it can make itself kind of invisible. And so there's like a bug that crawls up onto the predator's boot. That's invisible, so it looks like the bug's floating in the air. The bug is eaten by like a mouse or something like that, and then the mouse is eaten by a snake, and then the predator uses his like wrist blades to like kill the snake. And that's one of the first times that you see the predator. The snake is it's important imagery in the Comanche Nation. So if you're Comanche and you see that, like it's like a cool foreshadow of like, oh, this is going to be Predator versus Comanche Nation, and like
Nice.
those are the kinds of like I would say like native Easter eggs or like Comanche Easter eggs that like even me as a native person who's not Comanche, I didn't pick it up to like talk to a Comanche person, and that level of thought went into like you know making sure that the Comanche representation was spot on is just it's just like oh, it makes me appreciate the movie even more than I did after watching it the first time.
Yeah. That's so incredible. That's I think fun in the same way that like we were talking about if you haven't seen the other Predator movies, you're going to miss those Easter eggs. But it's fun to know that there's all those other Easter eggs too. Maybe I should watch it again and just watch fast through the parts where the man is covered by blood from the bear.
Did you watch the Comanche dub or the English dub?
I watched the English dub.
Watch the Comanche dub. It's real
Okay,
cool.
I will.
That's for sure the first major motion picture to ever be to ever be dubbed in Comanche.
We've talked a lot about a lot of things and could talk for another 30 hours probably about all the cool things that you know and are involved in. But I do eventually have to let you go and not trap you on my podcast forever. Everybody's obviously either watched Prey or going to watch Prey immediately right now. But something that I feel is a little bit more my speed in terms of like movies and TV shows is Spirit Rangers, which is coming out this fall. By the time this episode releases, we may have some more things to share about that. So check the episode description and all that stuff for those details. But what are some things you can tell people about the very cool Spirit Ranger show, which you referenced a couple of times here that you were a writer on?
So I mentioned that Spirit Rangers is the first kids TV show in the history of U.S. animation created by a native person with an all-native writers' room, native people working all over the production. And it's executive produced by Chris Nee, who created Doc McStuffins and
Nice.
Vampirina, and is just a masterclass kids TV writer. And the show is specifically about a family of park rangers in a fictional national park in Chumash territory, which is in southern Washington state. And it focuses on the kids of the family who are secretly superheroes, and they go on adventures in this national park that they're junior park rangers at, along with creatures inspired by folklore from different tribes. And we have the blessing of the Chumash tribe as well as the Cowlitz tribe, my tribe, to have characters that are inspired by our tribe's lore, our tribe's languages, and things like that are used in the show. And for me, it's just so cool that like the family is Shumash and Cowlitz, the mom is Shumash and the dad is Cowlitz. To be able to like write a historic, the first ever kid show created by Native people, about Native people and etc. To like not just have that, but also to have it where like, oh, they're like half part of my tribe is like
Yeah.
such a special thing. So I hope it's a show that we're also proud of and excited about, and I really can't wait for it to come out on Netflix in the next couple months, and I think people are really going to love it. Whether you have kids or you just love kids TV, I think it's worth a watch.
Yeah, it looks very cute. Anybody who knows me in life and has kids that are the right age for this, buckle up because I am gonna watch it and then tell your kids to watch it because I've read a couple of articles about it and I'm very, very excited to see this TV show
Yay.
as an adult. Um,
Yay.
but if so, obviously everyone who's listening to this is obsessed with you now. So where can they find you on the internet to stalk you in a very friendly way?
Oh, for sure. Okay, good. That's my right level of stalking.
Okay, okay.
Good. So you can follow me on Twitter at Joeytainment, and you can follow me on Instagram at Joey Clift with like 5 or 6 eyes. The reason it's Joey Clift with 5 or 6 eyes is that a 12-year-old took Joey Clift with one eye, so I just had to deal.
That's great.
Yeah. And this was a couple years ago, so he's probably 18 now, so I could probably just ask him for it, but I'm not gonna. I'm lazy. And then you can follow me on my website, joeyclift.com, which has links to a lot of my different shorts and things.
And we'll put all the links per always in the episode description for this. So Joey will be very easy to find there, as well as the super cool yet long titled shorts that I will not relist the names of, but those will all be linked in the episode description as well. Thank you again so much, Joey, for taking the time to come on here. It has been just a joy to get to chat with you about this.
Oh yeah, yeah. Thanks for having me. It was so fun.
So you can check all of those out. As anyone who follows this podcast knows, my page for the next week is turning into a Joey fan page. So there's going to be a lot of stuff across socials. You can check all of that out at Care So Much Pod across Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, all the places. And if you're out there and you are thinking to yourself, I care so much about this thing. I care. There's something that you could talk about for hours and hours, but you think that nobody else does, just know that I care. I care so much.